60 to 75 million people, nearly 3% of the world's population at the time, died in the Second World War, a conflict that was, in many ways, a direct consequence of the unresolved tensions and terrors of the First World War. The Great War, as it was known, was supposed to be the war to end all wars, but instead, it set the stage for an even more devastating global conflict. The rise of fascism in Europe and militarism in Japan, coupled with the harsh terms imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles, created a toxic atmosphere in which the seeds of World War II were sown. The war that was meant to bring peace and stability to the world had, in fact, created a power vacuum that would eventually lead to the downfall of empires and the rise of new, aggressive powers. As the world struggled to come to terms with the devastation of the First World War, the aftermath saw the emergence of new ideologies and leaders who would shape the course of history. In Germany, a young and charismatic leader named Adolf Hitler rose to power, promising to restore his country's honor and greatness. In Japan, the military began to exert its influence, pushing for a more aggressive foreign policy that would eventually lead to the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. The world watched in horror as Japan's military expansion continued unchecked, but it was not until the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937 that the true extent of Japan's ambitions became clear. The Spanish Civil War, which began in 1936, was another key event that preceded the outbreak of World War II. The conflict was a proxy war between fascist and communist forces, with Germany and Italy supporting the nationalists and the Soviet Union supporting the Republicans. The war was a testing ground for the new tactics and technologies that would be used in the coming global conflict, including the strategic bombing of cities and the use of tanks and aircraft. The world was witnessing a new kind of warfare, one that was more brutal and destructive than anything that had come before. The invasion of Poland by Germany in 1939 marked the beginning of the Second World War, a conflict that would eventually engulf nearly every country in the world. The war was fought between two coalitions, the Allies, which consisted of the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, among others, and the Axis powers, which included Germany, Italy, and Japan. The war was fought on multiple fronts, with battles taking place in Europe, Africa, and Asia. The introduction of new technologies, such as tanks and aircraft, played a major role in the war, enabling the strategic bombing of cities and the delivery of the only nuclear weapons used in war. The war was marked by unimaginable atrocities, including the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazi regime. Millions of others died as a result of massacres, starvation, disease, and genocides, including the forced labor camps and mass executions that took place in the Soviet Union. The world was witnessing a level of brutality and destruction that was unprecedented in human history, and it seemed as though there was no end in sight to the bloodshed and chaos. The Allied victory in 1945 marked the end of the war, but it was a hollow victory, one that was tempered by the realization of the devastating consequences of the conflict. Germany, Austria, Japan, and Korea were occupied, and German and Japanese leaders were tried for war crimes. The world was left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the devastation that had been wrought. The Second World War was a conflict that had changed the world forever, leaving deep scars that would take generations to heal. As the world struggled to come to terms with the aftermath of the war, it became clear that the roots of the conflict lay in the unfinished business of the First World War. The harsh terms imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles had created a sense of injustice and resentment that had fueled the rise of Nazi Germany. The failure of the League of Nations to prevent the aggression of Japan and Italy had shown that the international community was powerless to stop the march of fascism and militarism. The world had been sleepwalking into disaster, and it had taken a war of unprecedented destruction to wake it up to the reality of the situation. The legacy of World War II continues to haunt us to this day, a reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression and the importance of diplomacy and international cooperation. The war showed us that even the most powerful nations can fall victim to the forces of hatred and intolerance, and that the price of freedom and peace is eternal vigilance. As we look back on the events of the war, we are reminded of the importance of learning from history, lest we repeat the mistakes of the past. The world is still grappling with the consequences of World War II, and it is up to us to ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. The silence of the dead still echoes through the empty streets and ruins of the cities that were destroyed, a haunting reminder of the devastating cost of war and the importance of working towards a more peaceful and just world.